I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the session on the Down Syndrome Toolkit. You each have that packet in front of you. There's also a digital version that I have on my computer that I'll show you just some of the features of the toolkit when we get there. So thank you for coming and making time for this really exciting project. So first, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. My name is DiCocco. I am a professional expert with the Inclusion Collaborative. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. And so my jam is behavior. And I've worked everything from early intervention with little itty bitties all the way through adulthood with just a wide range of different needs and challenges that folks have faced. I recently, and here, grab one of those on your way in. For the Inclusion Collaborative, I have the honor of not only supporting local districts on inclusive practices, but I also hold our MOU for alternative education. So I work in the juvenile hall, the ranch facility, which is a long-term facility for justice-involved youth, as well as our two community schools, which are known as like formerly expulsion schools. So I also was able to write this toolkit in conjunction with Dr. Anna Marie Villalobos, who isn't here today, but she and I worked on this for a year. This was really a vision of Dr. Dewan. This is a topic that is near and dear to their heart. They have a close family member who has Down syndrome and really was a voice in making sure that we are providing educators and service providers with a really just cohesive and concise toolkit of best practices for kids as young as early intervention all the way through post-secondary. And that is what I hope you will see that we were able to achieve by creating this toolkit. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. First, I would like just, you all just have gone to a conference the last 3 days. I understand conference fatigue. And also you all just ate a very starchy, carb-forward meal. So how are you all feeling today? This is called a mood meter. It's one of my favorite ways to gauge emotional regulation. It's out of David Brackett's lab out of Yale University. I really love the mood meter. And this was just a very pretty version of it instead of like yeah, right? You're shaking. Yeah, it's prettier than the red, yellow, green, and blue. And so this is just another one that I found on the Googles. So how are you feeling today? You don't have to share, but maybe just do a quick little self-assessment and see how you're feeling. And also know while you're assessing whatever you need to do to access this time together, if you need to stand up, if you need to move your body, if you need to get a fidget, I don't have any, but you can, fidget with your hair. Whatever you need to do to access this, go for it. I want you to feel comfortable and be able to feel like you can access this space as you need to be able to learn and fit your needs. I will share that I am feeling, I don't know, like all of them. Maybe I'm feeling joyful. In this moment, I'm feeling joyful. Earlier, I was certainly not that. I was maybe discouraged a little bit earlier today because I had a pretty hard IEP earlier this morning. But now being able to talk about this, I'm feeling joyful and excited to share this thing that took a lot of work. So our agenda for today is we're just going to do a brief overview of Down syndrome. We're going to talk about the supports based on age and grade levels. Then I'm going to review the toolkit with all of you and I have it on a PDF version. I'll show you some of the hyperlinks. And then I just want to have some discussion and reflection at the end and give some time to answer questions or how you think you'll utilize this toolkit or what are you already doing. So I'll make sure that we save some time for that. All good so far? All right. Okay, so first, what is Down syndrome? So Down syndrome is named after the English doctor John Langdon Down, who was the first to categorize the common features of individuals with this condition. Dr. Jerome discovered Down syndrome is a genetic disorder whereby a person has 3 copies of chromosome 21 instead of 2. And so with that, there's 3 different types of Down syndrome. There's trisomy 21, mosaicism, and translocation. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of each of them, but I will say that 95% of folks who have a Down syndrome diagnosis have trisomy 21. Okay, so like most of it. And the other thing that I'll share is regardless of the different types, they basically what differentiates the 3 different types of Down syndrome is just different mutations in different genes, but it all shows with the same presentation. So regardless of which type it is, you wouldn't necessarily treat it any differently, right? And I think also just knowing that the likeliness is that most of the students that we're interacting with are going to have the trisomy 21 just because it's as common. So in the toolkit, it gives way more information on the differences between the 3 different types. I found this off of a parent whose whole existence on social media is advocating for their child with Down syndrome. And so it just says there's no current literature that correlates Down syndrome with environmental factors present before or after pregnancy, and it occurs across all races and socioeconomic levels. And then this quote right here says, did you know that babies are born with Down syndrome to parents all over the world from every race, ethnicity, region, culture, and age group? It's not caused by anything a parent does or does not do. It is randomly occurring and normal part and a natural part of the human condition, which I think sometimes when parents receive that diagnosis, whether it is during their pregnancy or after, whatever it is, there's that immediate spiral that happens for all of our families when they receive some type of diagnosis for their child of what could I have done? What could I have done differently? How could I have done different? I mean, for years, not to go on this tangent, but for autism, it was told that parents and mothers were refrigerator parents, and that refrigerator parents are the reason why kids have autism, right? Which we know that is a lie. And so I think just taking away that this could happen, its prevalence, and that it's a mutation of genes that can't really change and is just a spontaneous act that happens, hopefully puts a parent at ease. But I mean, it still is incredibly hard to navigate, right? In the United States alone, 1 in every 772 babies are born with Down syndrome. Every year, approximately 5,100 babies are born with Down syndrome, making it the most prevalent chromosomal condition in the United States. And one thing I'll add, which has always I've always just thought about this, and especially as I was diving into this literature, I knew it really well as a clinician, again, having done early intervention as long as I did and having support in classrooms where you have kids who have just such a wide range of need. I always then was wondering when I saw this, I think like I knew in my heart of heart that Down syndrome was really common. I just didn't know the numbers and that it was the most prevalent chromosomal disorder. It always then struck me, and I started to think about this a lot. Why don't we have a separate eligibility category for it then? It was interesting when I was thinking about it, right? Like we have one for autism, and then Down syndrome gets in a catch-all, right, of either intellectual, well, typically it's intellectual disability that we see, right? And so it's just really interesting if it's most common and the needs are so complex that we'll talk about in a second. It's interesting to me that we don't have, not like I want to change IDEA. It's actually the last thing on my to-do list is to ever work with the feds. But it is something that I thought about while I was doing this, because as we'll see, if you didn't already know, the needs of students with Down syndrome is just really complex and wide ranging. So what is Down syndrome? So when we look at it, there's all of these different areas that our student is going to potentially have challenges or barriers in, right? So in the middle, there's that pupil who's a visual kinesthetic learner, a desire and ability to learn from peers, to imitate and take cues from them, empathize and be pro-social, right? But then there's some of these barriers that they have. So for speech and language, there's difficulties in learning from listening, coping with long sentences, understanding new or novel vocabulary. There's a challenge with comprehension skills and generalization, right? So here's this learner who wants innately to learn and be social and do the things, but it's a barrier, right? Strong visual learning skills, the ability to learn and use sign and gesture to learn and read the written word, learn well from demonstration and visual resources. They also, many students will exhibit visual challenges. For all pupils to some degree, all children have poor visual acuity. 80% have poor focus at a close range of 22 centimeters. So a lot of times you'll see a learner with Down syndrome who's wearing glasses, right? I know I've seen that a lot. I've had a lot of my learners with Down syndrome have glasses. There's areas of need around fine and gross motor skills, short-term auditory working memory, and hearing. So it's not just about not being able to access content because of a learning difference. It's because there's also physical limitations to what that learner is able to do as a manifestation of their genetic condition. Other health conditions that are factors: 40 to 50% of children with Down syndrome have congenital heart disease. I remember when I first started working, 15 or so years ago with a wide range of students. Again, I noticed that a lot of the kids that I had with Down syndrome had the same scar in the middle of their chest because they all had heart surgery days out of being born. And I just like, I always remembered that. And when I was doing this, I was like, wow, 50% of kids with Down syndrome have had or might have to have some type of heart surgery, or they have this congenital heart disease that is something as they get older, they're going to have to constantly be monitoring, right? There's a thyroid deficiency, can lead to tiredness and reduced ability to learn. I've seen some people nod heads. I remember just having kids drop like flies and be sleeping for half of their day, especially after lunch. It was like, we are getting no academic work done after lunch. You are tired, you are sleepy. And so, right, it's not because, again, that they're choosing to be tired and sleepy. Maybe there's a thyroid deficiency, right? Hearing impairments: up to 80% of children with Down syndrome are affected by fluctuating conductive hearing loss in the early years. 40% have the issues persist into their school years, and sometimes this can lead into permanent hearing loss and sensory neural loss. Wild, right? I didn't know all of these statistics, and I remember just thinking, oh, this would have been helpful to know when I first started working. Visual impairments, we talked about that a little bit on that wheel. 50% to 80% of children wear corrective lenses to correct refractory errors, and research has suggested that all children have visual acuity, causing them to see in soft focus. Sleep difficulties: 0 to 80% may have experienced sleep apnea. I think that's actually a 60 to 80% and not a 0. Again, the right statistics are in that book. But other sleep difficulties include hard time settling down, night waking, early waking, and also something that, again, I knew just anecdotally, but it was really powerful to have the statistic in front of me, was that around 15 to 20% of young people with Down syndrome display additional difficulties because of their unique learning needs. There also might be a dual diagnosis of something like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD. So 16% of kids with Down syndrome have autism, right? ASD onset is also occurs without obviously a Down syndrome diagnosis, but both students with Down syndrome and autism show less social communication impairment than learners with solely an ASD diagnosis. ADD and ADHD studies suggest that between 31 to 44% of children with Down syndrome between ages 2 and 15 may show some behaviors that occur within the diagnosis of ADHD. And so here is, again, a unique learning profile with a student, right, who has Down syndrome. Also taking into effect, maybe they also on top of that have a comorbidity of ADHD or autism, right? I have seen on IEPs before learning, not OHI. I've seen autism as a primary and a secondary as an intellectual disability, or flipped around, because I have seen kids who have had both, or at least if it's not representative on the IEP, there's a medical diagnosis of somebody who has Down syndrome, and then there's also been assessed and screened for autism. So it's just something to note that might not show up as part of their eligibility, but it could show up in terms of medical need, which really, if you have that type of profile, you even have to cater to the need of that individual learner a little bit differently. However, I will say a lot of the things that you would use for like early intervention and learning materials for a student with Down syndrome, you'll find that a lot of the stuff you could also use for somebody with autism. So there is some flexibility and some co-occurring there. So here's just another wheel. I'm not going to go through it again, but it talks about those areas again, just a different way to represent it. This is in the manual as well. So yeah, and on that website, it's one of the ones that we have as listed resources. They actually have like really great like visual supports on there and just different stuff that was all collected by folks with Down syndrome. So And if you want to watch that video on repeat when you're feeling sad, YouTube has it. So through quality educational programs, support across all settings, homeschooling community, evidence-based interventions, and ongoing positive support from individuals in their environment, people with Down syndrome are able to live long, fulfilling lives. So what does that mean? So when we're looking at supports by age, right, we're going to be looking at early intervention first. So the primary goal of early intervention is to build on a child's strengths and accelerate the development of skills that may require more deliberate and individualized supports. I also have a hyperlink here of the Ways to Equity playbook. We did an early enhancement of the Ways to Equity playbook that talks also about not just what we think about early intervention, what that means in terms of like OT, PT, SLP, educational, and like behavior, but also how do we create a sense of belonging and trust in our classrooms, right? And so much of that when we're thinking about an inclusion model and inclusive spaces for all learners, that's the first step, right? When I do a lot of talks on inclusion, the first thing I say is acceptance and belonging are your best antecedent intervention to anything, right? And so this Ways to Equity playbook, I hyperlinked it here because there's just some really nice tools about how you can do that, starting as early as an early intervention or preschool, and just it's a really great toolkit as well. But when we're thinking about early intervention, right, this is like, what are the skills that somebody is going to need to maybe one day learn in an educational setting, right? Like, so that's our focus of early intervention. And when we go through the toolkit, we'll go by each of these areas about some of the suggestions and recommendations that we made. For preschool, many children still need support with their communication, and many children with Down syndrome will continue to need support with their muscle strength, coordination, motor planning, and following the behavioral expectations in a classroom. And the goal of preschool is to be able to target skills that will increase each child's success in an inclusive kindergarten setting. I'll say it again. Access inclusive kindergarten space, not be in a special day classroom. The Hollins case, which is Rachel Holland, right? That is the law that least restrictive environment is based on, was a young girl with Down syndrome. And they found through a whole hell of a lot of mediation that their least restrictive environment was in a general education classroom with a one-on-one aid, right? That is what LRE was based on, was the Holland case, right? And that was somebody with what used to be, you know, when we're considering looking at eligibility, someone with an intellectual disability. But that was somebody with Down syndrome that they said they can be served equally, if not better served, due to the social emotional component and differentiation that the teacher can provide, to be and have the right to be served in an inclusive environment. And federal law and state law has used that as the case law that then informs when we think about less restrictive environment. In elementary school, this provides an opportunity for children with Down syndrome to be in an inclusive environment amongst general education peers. This provides ample opportunities for students to imitate language skills, play skills, learning skills needed to best access the kindergarten environment. Just as a quick gauge for me, what grade levels are you all teaching? What, like, I'm just gonna point to you and you're gonna tell me like what grade level you're in. K through 5. TK through 8. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was like, wow. Okay, TK through 8. Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. Preschool through 6th grade. Say that again. Elementary, preschool. Got it. TK to 8. Okay, great. Yeah. So wide range. Okay. That's just helpful for me when we're looking at the slides, but it's all of you guys do all of it. So, so that tracks. Okay, middle school provides an opportunity for children to become more independent, more socially connected to their peers, and have access to a wider range of learning opportunities that are typically not offered during the elementary years. Then we have high school. As students with Down syndrome transition into high school, it's important to balance their academic, social, and vocational needs. And then lastly, we get to post-secondary, which provides the student with numerous opportunities to practice and learn new skills across different settings in the community. During this time, students may attend classes at a local college, engage in employment, participate in the community. There also might be wrap services of outside agencies that can support vocation. And really the idea is to provide a smooth transition into the adult world after the post-secondary program is completed. Does anybody have any questions or comments so far before we dive into the toolkit? So first, I just want to acknowledge this is in the toolkit as well about what the aim and the why and where this information came from. So the aim of the toolkit is to provide educators, school staff, and administration with tools and information gathered on best practices for supporting our students with Down syndrome in our school communities. The toolkit should enable readers to identify best practices to implement in their classrooms and campuses to best address the unique learning profile of a student with Down syndrome. Principles and values. At the Inclusion Collaborative, we believe that every learner has the right to an equitable and inclusive learning environment. This toolkit was written with this vision and mission in mind. And then lastly, this information was taken from various global resources. So a lot of this came from organizations on the other side of the world that have dedicated their work to disseminating best practices for students with Down syndrome from early intervention through post-secondary. And then throughout the toolkit, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different links and resources and different things. Cool? Okay, so let's go through it together. All right, so you all have this in your toolkit. So here's our table of contents. It goes through kind of what my first parts of the slide discussed, right? Like what's the history? What is the Down syndrome? Goes into way more detail. Early intervention through post-secondary. Then we have some student voice in there of students who have Down syndrome. I also created this educational implementation checklist, which I'm excited to share with all of you to make sure that we're doing our best to ensure best equitable practices for our learners. Parent resources, other resources, and then what we hope, and then all those references that we that we talked about from across the globe. So you'll see our intro, right? This is exactly what I just shared with all of you on that slide about our aim and our vision. And then we have this really beautiful message from Dr. Dewan on why this was so valuable and important to them and why they really pushed this forward, which is just a really, not only does it promote thank you for your dedication to our students and for joining us in this mission to make our schools places of acceptance, belonging, understanding, and success for everyone. That was what drove this toolkit forward, was the belief and the value of inclusivity. And it was really nice to have Dr. Dewan as such an advocate for this project. So the first part is just going through the history and background of special education. So I will not read this all to you, but if you take a little peruse, right, it talks about what's the history of special education, what are some of those landmark cases that really made IDEA and FAPE and LRE. Talks about the Rachel Holland case right here, right, which was Sacramento City Schools versus Rachel Holland. And then on the bottom here, it has all these really good resources for, I'll make this a little bit bigger, for special education and law court cases. I know sometimes when we're having this conversation about inclusion and LRE and FAPE, most, especially I would say like a general education population, they don't know any of this. They don't know what FAPE stands for. They don't even sometimes know what an IEP stands for, like what those three letters are. They just know that they need to be the general education representative, right, in that meeting. So I really like that these links are here because regardless of if you're a service provider, if you're a teacher, if you're a general education teacher, if you're a parent, like a lot of our parents don't also have access to understanding what actual IDEA says or what is true FAPE and what is true LRE. And so this has not only the narrative of this importance of it, right? It also has links to the actual case law. And I think we have a job as educators to equip our families and learning communities with what they need to know. So much fear around inclusion or fear around like these changes that are coming in education comes from them just not understanding what the law and the research says. We're not just picking this out of thin air. There's years of federal law and years of research that says why we do this, right? Not just because it's the right thing to do, but there's a legal obligation also. And this is why, right? Anyone have any questions about this piece right here? And you can see the hyperlinks are for the history of special ed, IDEA, the history of developmental disabilities, and then the rights case law. Yeah. Is it in the app? Okay, cool. If you're having a hard time accessing the PDF, I can also just forward it to you, right? If you don't have the app downloaded, just come see me at the end of this and I'll just share you with my presentation, and there's a hyperlink in it. I'm happy to share. I don't have to type in 35 addresses, so I'm happy to do that. So I can just share it with you as well. Yeah. And then you'll have the hyperlink and you can share it to whoever you want. I'd also suggest on your way out, just because we don't have that many of you here, take some of those with you if you're in a position of like, yeah, sharing the good word. And then I can also make sure you get the digital copy too. I've already sent this. I wrote it and I just got it and oh no. And I've already sent it out to like numerous school sites that I know just they don't know how to provide support for. And I think Heather, didn't you just also say that you shared it as well? Yeah. Okay. So the next thing in here is a way more thorough what is Down syndrome. It breaks down what are those 3 different types of Down syndrome, a little bit more about what those specific mutations are. Some of those same, the 1 in every 772 babies are born with it. It goes into a little bit more about maybe some potential risk factors of, what causes it. There was some belief and some research that suggests that like maternal age could be a factor, but the maternal age is apparently a factor for everything in the medical system. I'm just going to be honest and real about that. So maybe there's a link there, right? But there isn't a really clear link. We don't know why it happens at the prevalence in which it does. Here's that visual that I showed y'all in the very beginning. Oh, it's 30 to 80%. So it wasn't 0. Is 30 to 80%. It was like 0 to 80%. What did I do? 30% to 80% have experience sleep apnea. And then here again is that visual that I showed you guys. That was just another way of looking at the unique learner profile of a student with Down syndrome. Here's our girl Gigi again. Do you want to watch it again? No. Okay, so then we get into all of those things that we talked about, right? So the first thing here being early intervention. In this piece, there's a hyperlink to, in California, we're lucky, we have early start. So a lot of our families get support at the second that there's some type of neurodivergence or developmental disability known and that supports in the home can be offered, right? We also know that the federal law says that if you're three or older, you can access public education through getting, qualifying for special education through an IEP. So it outlines all of that stuff in there. There's also a link to early start. So some folks don't know about early start. Like a kindergarten teacher in a general education setting might not know all of the things that this child has already had access to before their first birthday, right? So there's a hyperlink to that. I also gave a quick little shout out to speech language, physical therapy, language therapy, occupational therapy, and sometimes applied behavior analysis. Some health insurance will permit ABA to be used as an addition to when we're teaching some of those learning to learn skills, or we're just another layer of therapy that can be provided. There's also a link here for milestones. I think sometimes we just think a student needs to be able to do something. Here, I'll even I can hyperlink some of these and show. So here's a developmental skill for children with Down syndrome. And so I'm a nerd and it has all of the literature, but then it also has here, birth to 5 months. What are some things that we want to be looking at? 6 to 10 months, 11 to 15 months, 16 to 20, 21 to 25, 26 to 30. So if you're in an early childhood setting, these are really good things just to know, right? And if you're still seeing them in preschool, which wouldn't be uncommon that you would see that given the learning differences here, you can see, right, where are those splinter skills, not just a deficit model. What are the things that they can do and what they can certainly do, and we can check that box. What are some of the areas of need, right? So this is a really cool thing too, because I think sometimes, again, we just base things off of like our own experiences or other students, and this here is specific for a learner with a Down syndrome profile that says what are some of these skills that they should be hitting at certain times. I'll also say that with like, I'm kind of, as a clinician, I'm also kind of like, milestones are great, but also milestones sometimes like evoke a lot of fear in a parent and evoke a lot of fear. I know, like with my 3-year-old, I was like, he's not turning yet, right? Like I just remember being like, he's not rolling. I was like freaking out. And then like 2 weeks later, he was rolling. So I also say like, milestones are great, and there are certain things we need to watch, but also kids develop differently, and every kid learns at a different pace, right? And so take all of this like knowing that every kid is individual, and again, it just kind of takes out kind of like providing you with the law. It also takes out some of the, well, they need to and should have and have to. Do they? Like, let's look at this list. So that's hyperlinked there. We also have, so then we broke it down for each of these areas for early intervention, preschool, elementary. We looked into what are some things that might be needed for speech, behavior, OT, PT, and all of these different things. They're just basic strategies. It's by no means an exhaustive list of what needs to happen, but it's stuff that the literature has routinely said is not only efficacious, but is also like best practice in these different areas. So, you know, visual communication, this may include communication stems with pictures, right? Having a visual schedule, and I want, you know, communicating with sign language. A lot of kids with Down syndrome, especially because of their visual acuity, will learn through pictures instead of, will learn through sign language instead of a picture, because if someone doesn't have strong focus and is using soft focus, a picture could create frustration. They can get there for certain, but oftentimes you'll see a lot of kids with Downs learning to communicate their basic needs through sign. So yeah, has a high importance of sign language, object permanence, and explaining what all of those things are. When I did early intervention, I think I played peekaboo 200 times a day. I now hate peekaboo, and I just don't want to do it anymore. I was so satiated on peekaboo when my own kid was like doing peekaboo. I was like, no, I don't want to do peekaboo anymore. There is a limit to how much peekaboo you can play. But in all seriousness, right? Like that's such an important skill, understanding object permanence, and that's a big part of early intervention. Oral motor imitation, auditory processing, the listening skills, and explains like what does that mean, right? Listening to novel sounds, listening to music, listening to a story, right? So hits gives some ideas of different things that you can hit. Behavior and social academic, behavior and social development, following simple one-step directions, teaching first then, and then there's a hyperlink to different templates that you can just print out for first then. It's not the hardest visual to make in the world, but if you don't have to reinvent the wheel, why do it? Imitation skills, like at this age, I remember, and when I work in these spaces with students, like singing Wheel on the Bus, right? Like really working on the open, shut them, or the wipers go like this, imitating through song. You're not only hitting now speech and language with auditory listening, you're also promoting motor imitation and gross motor imitation. Attending to a task, relinquishing items, visual tools. I mean, we hit this with so many different things, but I think when kids get into, especially preschool and kindergarten, there's an assumption that kids will be able to, when you say, give me that, do it. 9 out of 10 of the times they don't do it because they were never taught to relinquish something. So we have to teach those skills, right? In these early learning spaces, we have to teach waiting. We have to teach yes, no. We have to teach how to relinquish, how to share. These are all skills that we need to teach many students, and especially ones who have a Down syndrome profile. Visual tools to reinforce positive behavior. Then for motor, like for this, there's like an OT success in the classroom that has all of these different just what are different things that you can do that are for someone who has a Down syndrome profile, and explains what are the different sensory processing needs, what are the sensory systems. Really, really helpful in understanding what is the sensory need of somebody with Down syndrome, especially a little itty bitty with Down syndrome. So there's just, this is another really great, not only doesn't only equip with tools of what you can do for these different profiles, but what it is that it means. What is the difference between someone who is sensory seeking versus sensitive, sensitive. Oh no. Okay, I'll go back. Oop. Okay. So we did behavior and social, we did OT. Yeah, and then it also just talks about what are some of those early learning skills, right? So toileting, drinking from a cup, feeding yourself with utensils, getting dressed, exploring different stimuli, learning how to open something, close something, manipulating knobs and buttons, experimenting with crayons, not necessarily using them, but experimenting with them. Here's just another visual to, really state what Down syndrome actually is. It's a nice little visual, especially the language that we use around when we're talking about somebody with Down syndrome. It also normalizes and talks about what are some public figures and who they are that has, who have Down syndrome. Now getting into preschool, like I said earlier, this is where you're still working on a lot of language and behavior. Some of the physical and occupational skills are still needed. Again, I linked that milestone again, because this is still, we should be referencing that to see where our learners need to be. And we hyperlinked some speech and language activities. Now we're talking about what does comprehension look like? And that this link right here is really cool because it has teaching reading to students. And on it, it talks about just different ways to teach reading, right? Through picture matching, through picture selecting, through picture naming. Like there are so many resources here that I would have killed to have 15 years ago, because I think when we think about literacy, we expect kids to like be able to read and don't think about it as like matching a picture or matching something is early emerging literacy. So has all of these really great activities, how to do it, even tells you like this is what you can say, with links to more information on how you can access certain things. So that was a really cool resource that's a part of the toolkit as well. We also have concept development, and then this has different ways for enhancing critical thinking and some of those more now like higher level cognitive needs. Semantics, what are the semantics that we need to be working on? And then goes really in, like preschool is heavy in language development, right? So it has all of the different things, right? Like how are you developing these skills? What does it look like? And a little tip and trick on how to do it. For behavior, same as the last one, learn how emotions and like learn some regulation skills. There's a whole link to just different visual schedules you can use and download. Practicing social skills, what does that look like? How should we be communicating using short, concise speech versus these very long, elongated, stand up and go over there and then put that in the garbage. And when you're done with the garbage, I need you to come to the circle. Right? I hear it in classrooms all the time where I'm like, okay, they're 4. Like, right? Where it's just like, hi, pause, right? Get the attention of the learner first, and then go to the garbage, wait and see if they do it. Come sit down, right? Like there's like that pause. But what I see so often is like, no pause for there to be any bit of processing. And we're just going. And that kid's still like, did you say my name or somebody else's name? Right. And we do that with everybody. It's not just a Down syndrome thing. We do it with all little itty bitties. But we know that there's an auditory processing delay. We know that we know that there's just these needs. That's a barrier for some of these learners. Practicing social skills. Again, we can't assume that a kid knows how to share or how to take turns and different things like that. And then again, there's links to different motor needs here and what that could look like. So we also have for elementary. Now elementary is when we're really pushing. I mean, they should be in preschool. There should be an inclusion model, but now we're really looking at getting kids in the classroom, right? And inclusion is not lunch and music. It's not. Inclusion is language arts, math, science, activities, the field trip, all of these different things, right? The kids are invited. It's not an invitation. There's a couple of schools that I've seen evolve over the years where like the first day of school, every kid on an IEP has a general education homeroom, right? And I'm like, yeah, they have a space in a gen ed classroom from day one, not, okay, where can I put this kid in and have them go for this? Okay, their LRE, the percentage says 30%. What is that magical 30%? If I check the box that it's preschool, that it's, you know, lunch and PE, then I got my 30%. And that's not meaningful for the learner. If we know that kids learn by modeling, learn by imitation, why wouldn't we want them to be in a robust educational environment that maintains the rigor, but also then accommodates to the individual need, right? Why would we not want there to be an ample opportunity for language development, academic engagement, social skills, and all of that when you have the best model in front of you, which is neurotypical peers around you? So this really starts to talk about what are not only those speech and language skills that are needed. Right now we're looking at like conversational skills, entering and leaving play, social pragmatics, visual mapping of skills. So things are getting a little bit more complex. And again, there's a milestone that now goes up to age 6 that's linked on there. But you know, behavior and emotionally, what do they need? Continuing with those visual supports. Some of these you'll see, it says the same thing as, one second, I promise. It says the same thing as the thing prior because they might still need support in that area. It's not like you get to kindergarten, you no longer need a first then board anymore. You probably still need a first then board, right? So it's also not just adding new things, but also saying this might still be applicable to that learner. They still might need a visual schedule, right? There are kids I've worked with from second grade all the way through high school that it's still not the little cute like token thing that they have, but they do still have a way of monitoring their behavior that looks more of like what someone who is chronologically of a high school age needing, right? So, and we all need these little crutches sometimes. I'd be dead without my planner, my paper planner that I then, if it doesn't exist on both of my computer one and my paper one, it does not exist in time. And my post-it notes, I transcribe everything through that looks like I'm a crazy person and it's just everywhere, but it makes sense for me. Right? Like we all still use these things. And so little itty bitties, especially as they're going through preschool, kindergarten, elementary, still might need that support. It doesn't just magically stop. Yeah. Yeah. Inclusion isn't a thing. It's a mindset. It's a belief. It's a value. And we need superintendents, directors, principals, APs, and everybody to believe in it and not just say, we're going to have the gen ed 6th grade gym PE teacher be our gen ed teacher for this IEP, to say that sometimes they see them, sometimes they're not. And actually, I think they need APE. And you're like, where did this come from? Right. And this is what it's not meaningful. It's not in any way. And so, yes. Yes. Because it's still believed, this is a tangent, a good one though. It is believed that inclusion is a space, right? It is believed that inclusion is this place that you go to tick off minutes and say that you did it, and then you're done, and then you repeat and you do it over and over again, right? Which inclusion isn't a space. Like inclusion is the school, like it's the whole thing, like it should be, right? But what does that take? It takes a tremendous lift. It takes persistence, advocacy, a bunch of grievances. No, but honestly, right? Like I'm joking, but I was a service provider, and I was also, you know, in an administrative position. And I would say it's not a like you're acting like it's a right to be inclusion, where it's not a right, it's a practice and it's a belief, and this kid needs to be in this space because they deserve it, and it's their education too. not to say what the federal law says and what all the research says and what, right? Like, so I hear you. I'm with you. I don't know how many gen ed teachers there are here. My guess is not a lot, would be my guess. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But you're right. We're the ones who are always like, let's do it. And then we get told no, or not gonna happen, or okay, but let's just have it be 2 minutes a day. And you're like, what? That's not meaningful either. So it puts us all who are on the side of like innovating what learning spaces look like in a very hard spot. But the only way it changes is if we continue to be persistent, right? So ask that question, say that thing to your director, say that thing to the person in the district, and be the loud one. I was for 8 years, the very loud one. So yeah, that's a good question. I saw another hand. I mean, it is inclusion, but it's not inclusion. Like that's not meaningful inclusion. I mean, it can be. Kids can like foster really great social skills during that time, right? But also that social benefit is just as important. I would almost argue social benefit is like more important than educational benefit for a lot of our kids, right? But also they're there to also be in a learning space in a classroom, right? And if we're being truly creating that sense of trust and belonging, then every kid would have a seat in a general education classroom and no one would bat an eye and no one would have to fight for it. It would just be the thing that happens, right? Yeah, that's a really good question. Oh, okay. The question was, how do you, the first question was around why isn't there as much of a general education presence here? And how do we get more general education folks in this space to hear about inclusion? Because it's always the special ed folks who are pushing it forward, and that it comes from administrators. The second was a comment about that inclusion isn't just PE and lunch, contrary to popular belief. And now the third question is around how do you mitigate a belief that a teacher might have that says that this kid shouldn't be in here, and then maybe the other kids in the classroom can feel that, and how now do you how now do you address that because the kid might get bullied or something socially might come up for them. And my question to that is like, that's a very hard question to answer because there's a lot of stuff there, right? Like if that teacher doesn't believe in inclusion, then my first thing would be, what do they think inclusion is? What do they know about inclusion, right? What is their fear? So much of it is fear, right? Of like not knowing. So how can we empower? And again, that comes from a principal. The principal is coaching and supporting and is having those hard conversations around it, right? Not just the service providers, not just the special ed folks, right? But as a district and as a site administrator, how is that conversation looking like for that teacher, right? And if that teacher doesn't believe it, then the other kids in the classroom might pick up on that. And the only thing I can do is say that like when other people are in those spaces, that we are modeling what inclusivity looks like, that we're modeling what the language that we should be using looks like, that we're modeling that everybody's here and all means all doesn't mean 98%, it means 100%. And so what can we do to promote empathy, right? Like when I think about skills that kids need, the most beautiful thing, and what a lot of the research says about inclusion, is it doesn't just affect positively the kid that receives special education services and whatever that looks like, has such a profound and positive effect on the general education student. That kid is having a constant model of empathy and compassion and kindness and inclusion, and Lord knows now more than ever, that is what we need kids to come out of learning spaces with having, right? So I would say administration needs to be on board. There needs to be those hard conversations. And then when there are folks who are in the spaces who can promote inclusivity and kind speech and all of these other things that we're modeling it, while also that teacher is having some really hard conversations and trying to shift a mindset. But you can, what is it? You can bring a horse to water, cow. What animal is it? That. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it would. The barrier is big. Post COVID, even bigger. Right. I'm the behavior person. So you can imagine what my day to day looks like, where I'm like, I'm sorry, we're not going to call 3-year-olds violent. We're just going to put that away. And we're right. Like, it's just, we're in a environment globally, definitely nationally. And I can speak to it from Santa Clara County because I'm in a bunch of districts where, we are not as tolerable as we once were. I'm not sure we were incredibly tolerable to begin with, but the light it has shed much more brighter on just how non-inclusive and lack of tolerance we have. I could do a whole 90-minute talk on that, and that's what I do in my other talks. But Down Syndrome Toolkit. But these are great questions, and I encourage you to go back to your schools, go back to your districts, and ask these questions. It doesn't. You can leave here and you can be in this little bubble that we've created of inclusivity. We're like, yay, inclusion, and then you go back and you're just doing the same thing. You also have to bring up, right? And be the voice of inclusive practices and ask the hard questions, right? And say, what is it like? Why aren't we doing this? Or what could it look like? And also know that change is slower than a turtle, but change will happen. You just have to start, and you have to have realistic expectations. You have to start and get where you can get, because mindset takes a really, really, really long time to change. So you yourself also have to have realistic conversations, but it starts by continuing to bring it up, ask questions, push back, and advocate and fight. Be the squeaky wheel. Such good questions. I want to keep going, but I have to go back to my toolkit. Okay, so behavior and social development. Right now, we're talking about. I put a little link here because I think sometimes what we see is we use like a social story as like a just read the kid a social story, which again, this isn't what this talk is about. But social stories are actually not evidence based. There's no evidence that shows that they're efficacious. I've been on a mission for 8 years to try and bring that to anybody who will listen, but they are evidence-based in a way if you pair it with skills building, right? Because like, think about it, if you're just reading a book and saying like, okay, sure, I'll be good on the bus today, like this is what I do on the bus, but you're not teaching what that looks like and explicitly breaking down the skills. It's like saying that a kid can do calculus but they don't know how to add 2 + 2. So it's really important that we are breaking down skills. So there's this whole way that in behavioral science, we teach skills. It's called behavioral skills training. And it's like my favorite thing to do in the world. And there's a link there. But basically what it says for behavioral skills training is, you guys are seeing me try to ADHD it up right now and do 2 things at once. And I just can't. Oh, God, I did it. Okay. Behavioral skills training. It basically says we're going to say why you need to do this skill. Like, why do I need to sit on the bus, right? And then you're going to, so you have that rationale, the why. Then what are the steps you need to do it? And you write them out. And this is the steps. These are each of the skills we're going to work on. Then we're going to model it and we're going to practice it. And I'm going to do it. And then you're going to do it. And then I'm going to do it. And we're doing the thing and we're modeling and we're rehearsing it together. And then feedback is provided. You did it. You didn't do it. And we're going to keep going back to it as much as we need to until the skill is mastered, because that's how we teach anything else, right? So there's a really good hyperlink to behavioral skills training, which is my favorite thing in the entire world. And you can take my email and I can give you all the things I have on it because I do it all the time. But behavioral skills training is a really, really, really great way of teaching skills that isn't just read this thing and then magically do it, because that doesn't work. Again, motor, there's the OT success in the classroom. Now we're talking about middle school. Middle school's wild times. Things definitely change, at least in terms of like social stuff going on, right? A sense of independence. This is sometimes where you see kids really want to start emerging into independent selves, and then they might start to recognize that they aren't as independent as their peers, right? They become more socially aware of, well, why aren't I going to this thing, or why can't I go to this kid's house, or right, like why things are different, because middle school's rough. I work at middle schools, and it's a rough thing. You have something to say? Yeah. The intervention there is putting them in the inclusive environment and having them observe, right? Like that's the intervention there, right? Is like promoting inclusivity. You can't pull out a kid for a special service that isn't on an IEP, right? You can push in as a service provider and run a little group, right? Like what is this, what are the skills that we're working on, right? Like if we're running like a little speech group, like we should be doing less service pull out and more service push in anyway, right? So how can you then include, based on the ages that you're working with, how can you facilitate the conversation, facilitate the play, use another peer to push the ball or to roll the ball or to play catch with, right? How can you use the peer next to you and have that kid be prompted to ask, have your student who is, say, is a special needs student, to then say to the learner next to them, like, what did I miss while I was out? Or can you help me? You can use the buddy system. You can pair them up, right? A lot of that isn't necessarily a practice that I can say like do this exact thing. So much of it is allowing for there to be the space where modeling and observation happen that maybe us as service providers can push in and help facilitate, right? Like what is happening in the classroom, who can the kids sit next to, and make that recommendation, right? Because again, if we're coming from an inclusion model, then the kids are in the gen ed classroom, right? And you would learn those skills inherently by being in there. And then if they need that additional coaching, right, we can provide that through our service delivery. And that behavioral skills training, right, is a really nice way to do that too, right? Where you can have like two kids working on it together. You can have one of them, think about it like a social skills group. Usually in a social skills group, you have one or two kids who are maybe higher performing in a different area than your group, and use that as like your classroom space is just that, right? So I can, if there's questions about that, she's free to email me at the end, and I can give her some specific things. This thing keeps going out. But middle school is tricky, right? Because kids want to be more independent than maybe they're able to be. This talks a lot about fostering peer relationships during this time, because that is such a socially significant and important part of all kids, but especially in middle school, right? Middle school is rough. So how can you promote increased language, identify, how can you use strategies? This also talks about how you can receive individual small group support and what that could look like, because there might still be a need that a kid needs a direct service, right? That they need some SAI minutes, right? But what can that look like, and how is it done? Is it done one-on-one, or is it done in a group? My suggestion would always be to do it in a group, right? Because again, you have kids around you that you can be modeling off of and working together. High school, again, you're getting prepared for, the real world or post-secondary. Kids inherently are more involved in their educational journey at this point. Maybe the kids are going to the IEPs, they're having more agency in what everything is looking like for them. And so for our high school learners, this just has different ways that you can adapt the curriculum, what full inclusion looks like. Like by high school, it should be fully inclusion. Right? If you've been doing this for a while, by high school, the kid should be in a fully inclusive environment. provide intensive and direct instruction as needed, begin the transition process, and then post-secondary, and then, and then independent living skills, developing self-advocacy, and all of this has really, really, really good links here. And again, I'll share the PDF with you all on what that transition planning looks like, what workability might look like, right? A lot of these kids are planning to now enter the workforce or some other type of educational setting. What are some things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about self-advocacy? How can they be a part of their education and be a voice? I had a teacher tell me the other day that they were really, really mad that the student knew what their accommodations were. And I was like, first of all, I told them their accommodations, and then I printed it out and laminated it, and I put every teacher's name on it for them to hand out on the first day of school, as well as making sure that they had it memorized and was on their Google Drive as well as on their binder. So first of all, you can be mad at me if you are, and also how empowering to have a kid know what their accommodations are in 5th grade. It was the coolest. And I got like, they were upset that I empowered that child to know what their accommodations were, because they'd be like, well, I think I can actually use a calculator. And I'm like, yes, you can, my friend. It says that right there on your accommodations page that you can. And they didn't like that the kid knew. They're like, why do kids know what their own IEPs look like? It was a wild day. But you know, for a high schooler, and I would even argue I would argue for any student, but especially when we're thinking about high schoolers and we're thinking about post-secondary and really growing into like a more independent existence, right? Making sure that they're a critical part of that plan, not just sitting at the table being told what their education looks like. So this is really good links here on how to hold a student-led IEP. It's a great thing to bring to an administrator if you're in a high school, right? Or to like bring to your district. These IEPs are so deficit-based to begin with, and how can that learner take agency, and how can that learner really control what other people are saying about them and their educational experience, right? Post-secondary, just because for the sake of time, I want to get to our reflection questions too. Here's a whole bunch of links for post-secondary transition planning, college planning, career readiness, agencies that help and support this transition in the Bay Area. I'm not going to have time to show this video because it's long, but this was at our 5th annual conference in 2018. There was an individual who spoke who has Down syndrome about what their education looked like, and I don't have time to show the video because of time, but it was so good. You should just watch it. It's kind of like Gigi. It just will put a nice smile on your face. And again, another thing you can share with people. It's another resource that you can share. This is that educational implementation checklist that I talked about. This just really makes sure that we're doing the things that when we're saying that we're doing the things, and we actually are doing the things we say we will do. And so for teaching approaches and lessons, right? Like, are we individualizing it to each learner's unique learning profile? Are we differentiating? That's one of the biggest things I don't see in classrooms when we're doing kids in inclusive space, right? It's like, well, not every kid, for regardless of if you're a special education or non-special education, every person learns differently, right? So maybe this kid needs to use voice to text. Maybe this person needs to show mastery using a PowerPoint. Maybe this person needs to do an audio book. Maybe this person wants to write it out, act it out, record themselves, record somebody else, whatever it is. There's always a means, right? This is not a UDL conference. We're not talking about UDL in this, but if you think about universal design for learning, right? That is what this implementation checklist is really trying to get to. Are you differentiating? Are you using student voice? Are you making it meaningful? And are you actually doing the things that they need to do to access the learning space? So what does that look like for teaching approaches and lessons? Organization of the learning environment and supports, right? Like where inclusive environment where students are with groups of students without disabilities is the #1 thing on that space. Are you doing it or are you not? Is the classroom organized? So many times I'll walk into classrooms and there won't be the visual schedules. There won't be the first then boards. There won't be these things, right? And it's like, well, let's just put them in there. Like, and even in a general education classroom setting, we can have a schedule. We can have an individualized schedule for the learner who might need that. That's based off of the general schedule, but that learner can have maybe a different one, or everybody in the classroom has an individual one, so that kid doesn't look like they're different. That's some modification of the big one, right? Like there's a million different things that we could be looking at. Student learns collaboratively with peers is on there. And then what are the essential requirements of the intervention, right? Has all of this happened? Are we assessing? Are we keeping up with our assessments? Is there an FBA if it's necessary? It's not always recommended, right? Or needed, I would say. But are we making sure that everything that's essential to a learner is happening, right? Are we assessing in the areas of need? Are we differentiating? Are we providing educational resources? What about the students who are receiving special education services are also English language learners? What does that learning space look like for them? How are we differentiating? How are we showing up for those learners? This is completely different when we have those kiddos. Then there's a whole thing about parent resources. This was a phenomenal teacher, Linda Wooten, that I worked with in a district a couple of moons ago. And she shares her journey of not only being a special education teacher, but also a parent to her daughter who has Down syndrome. And it's really, really beautiful. Just what she went through, what the challenges were, how she saw education, how she saw where her daughter is in that space of learning, right? And she continues to kind of be navigating that as she's in adulthood. And then there's just a bunch of parent resources and additional resources on there. And then, yeah, our hope is just that this is something, and like it could be revised. So if there is that we need more peer, examples of how to create a peer-to-peer interaction, we can revise this thing. This was our first go at this very big task that took a very long time. But I would say, right, like the whole underlying theme of this is that inclusion is possible, and we should be thinking about all of this through an inclusive lens. And so the only thing really left, and I know we only have 5 minutes, is I did have some reflection questions of how do you see yourself using this? Was there anything that came as a surprise or was new info for you? Any lingering questions or comments? And so in the last 5 minutes, if anybody has anything they want to share or express, we have 5 minutes to do that. Yeah. Hold on, let me give you the microphone because I got yelled at on the interwebs.
So over the summer, I work as a swim instructor, and there's this one girl who I teach how to swim, and she has Down syndrome. We have her in a group with other kids, neurotypical kids, and I honestly when I first started working, I have to say I wasn't sure how things were gonna go just because I didn't have the education on things, and they didn't really take the time to teach us on it. They were just kind of like, here you go, and teach you how to swim. And obviously things were a little different. She was very clingy at first. She wouldn't let go of me in the water. She was very scared. But this showed me a lot of how the development of her is just like any other kids, and it just takes time.
Anybody else have anything they want to share or questions?
Thank you for putting this together for us. We have a couple of students in our district that teams decided that their ESN program was no longer the least restrictive setting for them, and so they're back at their school of residence. And so there's so many resources in here that I get to share with their educators that are new to them and learning about them. So I think this will be a huge resource, and I appreciate your work.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Do you have any resources on how to support students with Down syndrome and their challenging behaviors?
Not explicitly, but I can share some offline with you. I mean, so much of that is stubbornness comes up a lot when we're talking about someone who has Down syndrome, right? I think we've all seen the I'm not going anywhere and you can't make me behavior, or the I'm going to flop on the ground, right? And we see that with a lot of other, that is not specific to Down syndrome, but I would say in my years, I can't tell you how many kids just are like statues and will will not move, right? And so I think it's less about how do you treat that with a child with Down syndrome and more about how do you just treat it, right? Like if we're being truly inclusive, we wouldn't really be necessarily changing what we would be doing for one learner profile to another for like a behavior like that. Like waiting is your best intervention in the world for anybody. And we have to remember that we're always on the learner's timeline, not our timeline. And I have waited with the statue for 2 hours, right? Where, and then, okay, I'll come back in 5 minutes, right? Like in that moment, we're not going to change anything. We can provide choices, we can provide options, we can try and have a little redirect, we can try and say, but over there is your favorite thing in the whole wide world, right? And if they're not going to move, they're not going to move. And I would say that for any single student, right? What we don't want to have happen is get into that power struggle, right? And the repeating the same thing over and over again, because in that point, you're talking to someone who's like, their mind has been made, right? So I would say it's less like don't think about it. Just think about like what would you do for any student who's experienced that challenging. My recommendation as a PhD behavior analyst would be wait it out, provide choices, and here we are. But it's also not a popular intervention when I say, well, just let them wait. Yeah, wait it out. When you think about wait, think, why am I talking? We're not going to talk. We're not ignoring. You might come in, hey, just want to check in on you. Are you ready? No? Okay. Whenever you're ready. And you just move on. You have the freedom now to do 30 other things, right? Yeah. Yeah, good job. Your intuition was right. Okay, it's 2:00. I got to go. But if you need the links to this, if you can't get on the app, just come up here and I'll share it with you real quick.